Welcome to the Soul Grit Podcast. I'm Ann Taylor McNeese, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I also love Jesus, and I'm passionate about all things gospel and therapy. I created Soul Grit to be at the intersection of mental health and Christian faith. Christ followers need a place to ask questions and get answers about mental health. Join me as we dive into real stories and real questions from people who want to honor God with their hearts, souls, and minds. Hi, welcome back to the Soul Grit Podcast. This is Ann. I'm here today with Matthew and Joanna Raabsmith. Hi, guys.
Hello. So glad to be here.
And so we're in this new journey of having dual guests on the podcast. So luckily, this time you guys will be able to hear the difference in the male and female voices. You'll know who's talking.
Hopefully.
So this is our first couple that we've had. So I'm excited to have you guys. And Matthew and Joanna are going to talk today about sexual addiction and healing from that. And their organization really serves a lot of people in this way. So why don't you guys introduce yourselves to our listeners?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we're Matthew and Joanna. We've been married for 15 years. We've got 3 little kids, and we share a business. That's probably where we spend a lot of our time. So we started a private practice a number of years ago, predominantly working with couples and kind of focusing in this area of addiction, kind of betrayal, and repair. We really were interested in helping couples repair relationships that have been really racked by infidelity. And so we've been doing that for a number of years. We do it together. We really love the work.
Yeah, and a big part of our passion in our work is because it's a part of our own story. So many years ago, we actually went through healing in our own relationship from sexual addiction, betrayal. And when we went through it many years ago, there was a lot of support for Matthew. There was very little support for me and almost no support for us as a couple. And we really craved to have a healthy, fully healed, thriving relationship on the other side, but there weren't a lot of resources. And so we kind of stumbled along through our journey, and by the grace of God, had the resources we needed when we needed them, and really just have a passion for helping other couples find hope and find healing on that journey.
Yeah, betrayal and addiction and infidelity, it just cuts you to the core. And I have to admit to you guys, even as a marriage and family therapist, I love working with couples. I love the energy that's in the room. Like, they make me work for my money, right?
Yeah.
But I have to say, like, I struggle so much with infidelity. Just like helping couples through that is so painful. It's so I just find it personally difficult to work with. So I'm right now I'm doing a training. I'm doing the treating affairs and trauma training through the Gottmans. And
great.
so I feel like you guys coming alongside at this moment will be perfect, because I'm going to feel more equipped for this, and I won't have to turn down every referral that's talking about infidelity.
Good. They're out there, so they need, and a lot of folks need good help.
They need the help. Yeah, I think it's more common than we think, right?
It is.
Absolutely.
It is. Yeah, and it happens in a lot of different ways. I think some people have some misconceptions on like infidelity is this one thing, right? It's maybe one person having an affair that has like certain things attached to it, where betrayal can happen in so many different ways, and sometimes not even sexually. I mean, there can be financial betrayal. We've had clients who've had financial betrayal. We've had clients who've had kind of more just emotional betrayal. And so it really does affect, I think, more relationships. And it's hard because it doesn't typically follow some of the same kind of support structures that you'll maybe see with regular kind of couples counseling or couples coaching. There are some specific things that have to happen to get that couple to where they want to be. But when they do, when you get those couples who go from that place of just absolute kind of devastation and brokenness to healed, to kind of one, it's really magical. I mean, it feels like a miracle. And I think that's one of the things we love about this work, is we feel like when we graduate couples, it's like we're getting to be part of a miracle. We're like, wow, I don't know how that worked, right? Can't believe that happened. I'm so glad it did. And so that's what we really love about it.
Yeah. Well, I don't know where you guys want to start. Do you want to tell a little bit about your story, or do you want to tell about the work that you do first?
I feel like our
Yeah,
story.
because
Yeah. Okay.
it really impacted the
Yeah.
work in a big way. When we were early on in marriage, we always knew we wanted a really healthy, thriving, intimate connection, right? We both had that passion, that goal when we got married. Neither one of us had a lot of great tools for how to actually do that, right? And so we would try. We read books, we went to conferences, we did what we knew how to do, but we found that we kept getting stuck, right? It was when it was good, it was really good, but when it was bad, it was really bad. And we could get into some fights that could last days, could last weeks. And so we were actually in grad school together, going to seminary together, when we found a program at the time called Strong Marriages, Successful Ministries, for couples going through kind of ministry training together. And so we did that little 8-9 week group course, and it dramatically changed the way we saw our relationship. We did some follow-up therapy around the modality called restoration therapy that I'm now trained in. And within 6 months, our relationship could not have looked more different. It was amazing, the skills, the tools we learned there. And so we knew then that we had a passion for helping other marriages. We really wanted to bring that type of transformation and intimacy to other couples. But we kept getting stuck. Like we had gone really far, but for me, it felt like there was just this like almost like this glass wall. I could see intimacy on the other side, but it kept hitting my face on something. I did not know what it was. But part of that was because something was going on in a relationship that I didn't know about, that was hidden from me. And so I couldn't know what it was.
Yeah. And so even though we had worked a lot on ourselves or on our relationship, I had not done a lot of work on myself. And I had brought into our relationship a 20-year struggle with sexual addiction, with pornography, that would ebb and flow. And so I would always kind of have this idea that it was gone away, it would never come back. And even when Joanna and I were first together, and she was kind of asking me about issues like pornography, and sexual history, I kind of explained like that's in the past. It's gone away. And that's where my mind would go. I would think it would be gone, but it would always come back. And it had come back in our marriage, and it'd come back and it'd come back. And like she said, she didn't know what it was. Even for a while, I don't think I was putting the pieces together that that's what was holding us back. But over time, it became aware that as long as that was present, I was lying to her, I was hiding. It was always creating this barrier. For me, it was often a barrier of kind of fear and shame. What happens if she finds out? Will there be a future for us? And so, about 3.5 years into our marriage, it kind of came crashing down. But in an interesting way, Joanna went to a class at Fuller as she was getting started in her marriage and family therapy program, and a pastor came and gave his testimony. And he gave his testimony on dealing with sexual addiction, restoring his relationship, and having his marriage. And so Joanna's in that class.
Yeah, and as he's talking, I'm just like, something is connecting with me. The light bulbs are going on. I'm like, that's it. That's the thing, right? Like my gut just knew. And so as he was sharing the resources and his journey, those steps, I'm just like writing them all down. And I went home and I was telling Matthew about kind of what I heard, what he shared, thinking at any point he would have that same gut reaction and be like, that's the thing, and confess. That did not happen. So we were kind of coming near the end, and I finally flat out asked him, I was like, are you struggling with this? And he said one word. He said, yes. It was the first time he had been honest about that in our relationship. And there's kind of both like a pit and a sense of hope at the same time for me, right? There was this like gripping fear of what all is behind that. Yes, I don't know yet. And then that hope piece of like, okay, we finally have some level of honesty. We can maybe finally move forward. And so I gave him that piece of paper with all those resources, and we basically dove into recovery. It became our kind of second full-time job for the next 2 years. We really, really worked hard on healing both individually and as a couple. And I kind of mentioned earlier that healing journey, there was a lot of resources for him, very little for me, and almost none for us as a couple. And so as we went through our healing journey, we started seeing a path. And as we started coming out of that and getting passionate about helping other couples through that same journey, it became apparent that these couples need a path. They need some kind of visual or structure to help them understand what it's going to look like and is this possible? And so with our colleague Dan Drake, who is also in this field doing the same work, we created the intimacy pyramid, which really is that pathway for couples healing. And what we love is that it's not just pathway for couples healing from betrayal, it's the pathway for every couple wanting healthy, thriving intimacy, right? And so we use it with all of our clients, no matter their story, but especially for couples healing. It's really nice to be able to see, all right, we'll draw the picture up for them, show them, walk them through it. And just the sense of encouragement and hope, I think, in knowing like this is possible. There's a framework that works. You can do this is really encouraging.
Yeah.
Let me ask you, Matthew, one thing about your journey. Did you have a moment just like between you and the Holy Spirit where your eyes got opened, or was it really like Joanna or other people saying, hey, maybe this is what's going on? Like, how did you get to that point where, like Joanna described, she had this awakening,
Yeah.
like, oh, that's what it is, but you weren't there yet.
Yeah, I think I had what I'd call like a growing sickening. It was almost like as I work with a lot of men dealing with sexual addiction, and we talk about this disconnect between our values and our actions, this kind of lack of integrity, and that's what I was experiencing. Like I knew who I was, I knew who Joanna was to me and what our relationship meant to me, but I could see that my actions were not lining up that way, right? I was treating our relationship like garbage when it meant so much to me, and that just left me feeling so kind of nauseated. But I also had like this impending sense of fear that I couldn't stop, I couldn't fix it, and that Joanna would be gone, and everyone would be gone out of my life, if it ever came out, right? If people started to know. And so there was these kind of competing factions, right? Of like this kind of like, I hate this, I wish this was different. But I don't know how to do it. And I do remember, I don't know exactly, but I remember about maybe about a month or two prior to this testimony, I remember praying one night and just like telling God, like crying out, like, if there is a way, if you can just show me the way out of it, like I'll do it. I just don't know what to do. I don't know where to go. And so when she's telling the story of hope, I think that's when things kind of like I felt that like, okay, I can move forward. I would have loved to move forward earlier. I would have loved to have more courage to kind of maybe tackle it earlier, to confess earlier, right? To not have that happen in our relationship. But it was that testimony of hope that I think gave me that sense of like, okay, if it's going to work, if God, I kind of told God, give me a way, and he did. So I was kind of like, well, now I have to take it, right? Like you gave me what I asked for. I don't think it's what I wanted, right? I think I was like, wait, I'm gonna do all right, this is what it's gonna look like at first. But it was like, okay, like you did what I asked, and so let me try this out. And I think that and it's made all the difference. I mean, I have a life because of recovery, and I have a life that I like. I really, really love the life that we have, and that's ultimately the gift of confession and getting help, right, and leaning into the resources.
So it was your wife coming to you with like this message of hope, not condemnation, or not like, I'm sure you were so hurt, Joanna, but you weren't coming at him as like, you hurt me and so I'm gonna make you pay for it. You know?
Yeah.
No, I kind of remember what she communicated, which I actually appreciated. It was, she did, I don't know that she said these exact words, but she kind of made known to me, I know you're better than this.
Yeah.
I know what you're capable of. And I expect you to be able to do that, right? That's Joanna had a sense of her value, and so I think she was able to say, like, I'm worth it, uh, and I know you are too, right? And I think that's what I appreciated the most about the hard work she did early in our recovery, was just to kind of really know her own value and assert that value, not in that kind of condemning, critical, like angry, mean way, but just to be like, this is what's possible. And I think you can do that. And that really left the ball in my court. that meant it was kind of like, I'm going to either do it or not. But it was really clear what was going to happen in our future if I didn't. It was kind of like, hey, if you choose this instead of choosing me, I can't choose us, right? And so, okay, that makes sense. And so, that clarity early on kind of lit a fire in me to get real about getting this out of my life.
Mm-hmm. As you're talking, I'm thinking about something I heard from Tim Keller, and I'm sure he was probably quoting C.S. Lewis in this, so because he did that all the time. But talking about when you're looking at your spouse, you're looking at this like glorious creature that God created, and in their like eternal destiny, they will be this glorious thing, and you're dealing with kind of like this messy draft of them here in our worldly existence, right? But you're really trying, what you're trying to do as you move towards intimacy with your spouse is you're trying to see that creation that is going to exist in heaven with God for eternity, and how beautiful that person is going to be, and you're trying to help them get a little bit closer to that while they're on this journey. And so if you can keep that picture in mind of how glorious they will be when they're with Jesus, then you can be like, okay, you're messy right now, but I'm gonna keep working with you.
Yeah.
Because the same is true for yourself, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that.
Yeah. Okay, so then tell us how you kind of got started in the work and what it is that you do mostly with people now.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it was a little on accident. I think
we didn't like plan like, great, now we're going to be the couple that helps other couples through betrayal. This is going to be awesome. Like, no, that was not the plan in the beginning.
Yeah, I think we knew we wanted to help couples. We weren't sure what it was going to look like. We did at some point. I wanted to never talk about this subject ever again. I was like, we're not going to be the pornography people.
Exactly.
Now we're the pornography people.
Yeah.
But what we found was, I think God brought us the people that we needed to work with. And so, we were doing some kind of coaching, and Joanna was doing some therapy. We were doing some things together, and it just wouldn't fail, right? Every week there'd be a couple, and that would set a story that sounded very similar to ours, or kind of. And so that kind of forced us to go, what do we do with them? Because we had kind of been through the journey ourselves. And like Joanna said, we had not had a lot of guidance clear. We had kind of found these little pieces, but we were.
And even in that, like, we did professional trainings, right, on this. And so, but there aren't too many professional trainings, especially over 10 years ago, right, on the couple's journey. And so we were trained professionally on the individual journeys, but we were really passionate about that couple's journey. And we kept having couples come to us going, we want this marriage to still work. Yeah. And so we kind of said, okay, I think that's what God is calling us to do. God is calling us to help these couples. And part of helping them is creating that journey, figuring out what it looks like for them to go from really surviving to thriving as a couple.
Yeah. And so we started working together, and then we started writing and kind of teaching, presenting, because we wanted to create this pathway, this kind of framework that really simplified it. One, for professionals, because we were colleagues with a lot of friends who were asking us, how are you doing this? How are you getting success? How are you getting these couples to kind of restoration? But also just for the couples, we wanted something that a couple could see even in the worst place in their relationship and go, okay, if that's possible, if there's that way, kind of like my experience, that, all right, I'm in, I'll do the work. And so the kind of intimacy pyramid was born in that. And it really, the first time I remember knowing it was going to help people was when we drew it up with one of our first betrayal couples. And because they were asking us, who are we going to be? What is this going to look like? And we just kind of drew this up on this little whiteboard we had in Joanna's counseling office.
It kind of looks like Maslow's hierarchy of needs pyramid, right? Where those kind of base needs are at the bottom. You build up to the top to intimacy, right? So we drew on the board honesty at the bottom, right? Like there's been lying, deceit, betrayal. You've shattered the foundation of your relationship. So we have to rebuild that level of honesty. Once you do that, you can rebuild safety in your relationship. That allows you to rebuild the trust. Once you have the honesty and safety, you can actually start to lean in and begin to trust your partner again. Once there's a lot of trust established, you can begin to risk that vulnerability, right? Step into that risky place of vulnerability. And through that vulnerability is what we build at the top, intimacy.
And I just remember the husband just like goes, that's it, right? He pointed to the wall. And he's like, that's what we want. That's it. That's what do we got to do, right? And I was like, okay, I think this is gonna work, right? And so, and it's been fun because since then it's really been about kind of fleshing it out a little bit and like asking ourselves and with the clients that we work with, how do we strengthen these areas? How do we help couples be more honest, be more safe, have more trust, right? Be more vulnerable, experience healthier intimacy. Because we know that work doesn't stop. That's what we like, is that we're close to, 15 years married, 12 years in recovery. We're still working on all those levels. There's not a day that goes by we're not thinking about honesty or vulnerability in our own relationship. And so it's not like, oh, we got to intimacy, so we're done. We get to fictionally retire, and go live on a beach somewhere. Like we're still doing that work, and that's what we love.
Yeah. Well, I feel like you guys just answered some of the questions I was going to ask you next, but thank you for explaining the intimacy pyramid. I'm visualizing this and seeing, I just think you guys really hit it on the head with how people want to see the pathway. They want to know the roadmap. Working with all kinds of different situations in my practice, even if it's just like a run-of-the-mill depression, like people want to know, how long am I going to be this way? Is this just how I am now? Or what's going to happen next? What does recovery look like for me? And am I ever going to get there? And so I think that idea that you have of charting the path for them, like there is a path and you do the hard work and we're going to help you follow the path and you're going to get there. And that's really hopeful.
Yeah. And I think we talk a lot about like just next steps with our couples, right? Like you're talking about like a client might have depression, like what's the next step? What are we going to focus on right now? I think a lot of we were noticing that when couples were coming to us with this shattered trust, they were like, they're asking about the end goal, and we're like, yeah, absolutely, we want you to see that. But man, to even get you both in a room long enough to have a kind of important conversation, we just got to get all the cards on the table, right? We're not even being honest about what's happened in your relationship. So we can't even begin to think about like this beautiful oneness of intimacy if that's not kind of dealt with. And so that's what we love as well, is it just lets us kind of deal with that kind of very next step. It also helps us because we get couples who've tried to work up the pyramid, but didn't really do much of the work on the bottom, right? And they keep asking, they're like, why do we keep kind of crashing in on ourselves? Like, why do I keep feeling like I don't trust him, or I don't trust her, or I never open up and I'm vulnerable? What's really nice is we'll go, let's just go look back down at the bottom, right? And they'll say something like, oh, well, I don't feel like we're balanced as a couple, right? I feel like I do more than they do. And we're like, well, that's a safety issue, right? That's an issue of relational safety if one of us is putting in and the other isn't. So of course you don't want to be vulnerable, because if I'm not feeling safe, vulnerability is off the table, right? We know that in our body, right? Our body tenses up when we're unsafe. It's less vulnerable. I have to really feel safe. I have to trust to kind of to step into that vulnerability. And so helping couples kind of see wherever they're at, moving kind of up and down and navigating, like, how do we improve?
Yeah, I see that a lot. How do you guys handle, let's just be honest, there's a lot, usually relapse when there's an addiction. Like, what do you do when that happens? Because that's going to cause that to crumble again too, right? But it is kind of like a expected part of addiction recovery.
Yeah.
It's tricky. It is and it isn't. We found that sometimes because we already set it up as an expected part, it's more likely to happen, honestly. And we have a lot of couples where that doesn't have to be the story. And so we kind of start reframing some of that immediately when we work with a couple. And partly because infidelity, sex addiction, it has a different impact on the relationship and my partner when there's a relapse, right? Versus kind of an alcohol or a drug addiction that's very disconnected from the identity of the safety of that relationship in terms of that covenant and that commitment that we have made to honor each other and be faithful to one another. And so understanding that that different impact, I think, is so important, and going, we really are going for full sobriety starting day one.
Yeah.
That's the goal. That's the hope. We're going to absolutely prepare for relapse, right? But that's not going to be an expected part of this journey, because we know how very damaging it is. And so damaging that if there is enough relapse, sometimes it's crumbled that relationship so much, there's no coming back from it, right? And so I think sometimes it's important just to kind of name some of those realities with a couple so that they do understand. And then, like you said, right, and then starting to prepare. And if there is a relapse, how do we use that, or what do we want those moments to look like?
Yeah, I mean, I work with a lot of guys who are in recovery, and so they're working on addictive tendencies and kind of trying to create this long-term sobriety. And, you'll sometimes hear this term slip. I had a slip, which is kind of code for relapse. And we'll acknowledge that and say, yeah, you're going to make mistakes. Where were you when you made the mistake, right? If I slip next to the edge of a cliff, there is a huge, a lot of damage happens. If I slip on 20 feet from that cliff, I'm probably just going to fall on the ground. It might not feel good. I might have to go, ooh, that's not what I want my life to be, but it's probably way different than on the edge of that cliff. And so I think part of knowing if you're in any kind of addiction recovery is going, how much am I willing to move those boundaries so that I'm just never near that edge? It doesn't mean that I'm not going to I'm going to make mistakes, right? We do know behavioral change will include that kind of return to old behaviors, right? But it's how far do I go? And that's usually where that safety is built, because I found partners get it. They don't have an expectation that their spouse is perfect. It's that, what are you willing to do with your imperfection, right?
And what are you proactively doing, right? Like you have a lot of empowered decisions you can be making before you get to that place of danger. How actively are you pursuing those healthy boundaries that you need in your life? How much are you approaching them from a healthy place emotionally, right? If I'm really resistant and begrudgingly kind of letting new boundaries come into my life, at some point, my destructive entitlement will take over and I'm going to cross that boundary, right? Versus if I see those as the things that's saving me, that's helping me create the life that I've always wanted, I'm going to be pursuing those in a much different way. And so when a slip or a relapse happens and I'm in that place, right, versus that kind of earlier place, that's going to impact the partner differently, the betrayed spouse differently, right? If I see my husband authentically pursuing health in an aggressive way and he's struggling, I feel a lot more peace and grace in that moment than if he's really neglecting his recovery, or I can tell he's doing it begrudgingly, things like that. And then how he would handle it, right? Again, we talk a lot with couples. The goal of healthy connection isn't that you never have conflict or you don't mess up from time to time. It's how you repair as a couple, right? It's the same thing with a slip or relapse. How are you handling it? How are you repairing it and kind of dealing with the aftermath of that? Are you using that opportunity to learn more about yourself, to grow? Are you really showing up in new, safer ways with your spouse? That can actually bring a lot of healing and growth in the relationship.
Yeah. Can we talk a little bit like nitty gritty here? Just forewarning for listeners that may be playing this in the car with their little kids in there. I'm going to talk about sex a little bit. How do you get back to like a sexual relationship when you've been betrayed?
Don't rush it. I think we see that the healthiest relationships are moving physical intimacy. It lags behind emotional, relational intimacy, even spiritual intimacy. It's not that it's not important, and it's not kind of a key part of that holistic intimacy, our physicalness, but there's so much vulnerability and risk when our bodies get involved. That it's helpful to know that we're kind of ahead a little bit relationally, so that creates the space for us to be more vulnerable physically. One of the key places to start is to get honest about your story. So we'll tell couples a lot, when you're ready to have conversations about kind of sexual reintegration and what physical intimacy is going to look like, we've got to talk about our past. My past included really destructive sexual kind of stories and kind of understandings, right? I when I'm working with someone who's struggling with pornography, I'll say like, hey, pornography teaches that sex is something that I get when I want it, with who I want it, at no cost, right? How I want it, right? It's the exact opposite of God's design of physical intimacy between a couple. And if I don't realize that doing that, right, engaging in that practice day after day for years shaped my understanding of sex, I can't go back into our relationship different. I'm gonna bring that self back in. Even if I have stopped doing that, that history affects me. And so I've got to get real with myself about kind of what I learned and maybe even ways that showed up between us as a couple. Because a lot of times what we'll see is sexual addiction will begin to play kind of impact the physical intimacy of a couple even in their history before the sexual addiction was known, right?
Yes,
and the wife would even maybe say like, oh, I felt pressure from my husband, or right, I felt like there was things that were being asked of me that didn't feel comfortable. And so talking about that history, getting that out in the open is the only way to move forward.
For that betrayed spouse, learning to listen to your body, right? Because when you've experienced betrayal, when you've had that trust and that safety shattered in a relationship, it impacts your body. And so what a lot of partners have done is they've kind of disconnected from their body in that season of not knowing, right? I kind of talked about how like I knew something was going on, but I couldn't figure out what it was, right? And so enough of that, and you start just shoving down that feeling of discomfort because you don't know what it is, and that feels really scary. So I'm just going to try and disconnect from that feeling, right? Because I can't fix it, I can't solve it. And so for partners, starting to learn to listen to your body again is really important in sexual reintegration because it's a very bodily experience, right? We're going to be physically, sexually intimate. And so what can happen is if my body starts to tense up because I'm feeling unsafe, it's going to impact our ability to have really authentic connection and healthy intimacy as a couple. And that's a very normal experience for betrayed partners when you start to be physically intimate. And so, like Matthew said, taking it slow, learning to listen to that betrayed spouse's body. What are you feeling? What are you needing? And for a lot of couples, it's getting some professional support in this area, right? We highly recommend sex therapy or some type of sexual reintegration therapy. So you feel like you're empowered with tools. Again, the steps. It's very similar. We will use the intimacy pyramid as a framework for sexual reintegration with couples, right? And helping them know what are the small steps you can take towards each other that's going to build that safety emotionally and in your body. So by the time you're being kind of fully vulnerable and intimate physically, you feel safe. You feel okay with that.
Mm-hmm. Now, Matthew, I want to ask you this because I know you work with a lot of the guys. Sometimes the guys that I work with will be saying something like, well, the reason why I had to do that thing was because we weren't having enough sex or we weren't having the thing. And like, Joanna, you're laughing because like you've heard this before, right? And on one hand, you're like, okay, I see the rational part of that, but that's not it, buddy. So tell me what you say to that one.
Yeah, I mean, I just always invite them to bring me a case study of someone who's died because of lack of sex. If they can produce throughout the history of all humanity someone who died because they didn't have sex, right? And so I think I get it. And a lot of times what I'll do is I will I may not be my first word to them. They might not call me back. But I will get real with them and say like, if this becomes an idol, right? Meaning that this is more important than your relationship with God or your relationship with your spouse. I mean that sex is a gift we get to enjoy in relationships, but it's not a guarantee for any couple, whether there's addiction, betrayal. I mean, there can just be physical realities that prevent a full kind of sexual experience. No couple is going to be prevented from an intimate, life-giving connection because of that. No human is going to be prevented from thriving. Does it contribute to our thriving? Yes, absolutely, but it will never prevent. And that's why I think the Bible's pretty clear about like sex is something you can have, right? It's a gift, but it's also something you can go without. And the life that you will get to live with it or without it will still be a full life. That's, I think, once it's off the table as a kind of like a bargaining chip, then everything changes, and typically also changes for the partner. I mean, we just know when demands are put on sex, it kills desire in the partner. If there's a sense of kind of duty or obligation or demand on sex, desire just plummets. And so, and I think that's one of the things I'll talk to guys a lot about is I said, if you've had this kind of practice of demanding sex, even if it was just because you were maybe pouting or you were upset when she had a headache or wasn't feeling great physically, that's pressure that actually killed her desire. Whatever natural desire she had in the relationship or for you physically, that demand will kill that, which is going to get you further from the thing you actually want, right? So it's like you want the thing you want, stop wanting it so much, and you might find yourself in a relationship where you get it. And it's, I know, there's probably some people out there going, okay, let me write that down, right? Don't ask for it, and then I get it. It's not that simple.
Formula.
In some ways, it does work that way, right? And so just helping to do that. And that's also where it's helpful to know our history. For many men, their sense of identity comes through what they get physically, right? Physical touch, sexual touch, that informs their sense of self. And if I can only feel good about myself because someone will have sex with me, that's a very hollow sense of self. That's a very fragile sense of self. So sometimes what I'll do is just peel back even more and say, let's just talk about you, right? Let's just talk about how you feel about yourself. And how we maybe strengthen that so that you don't have to have this idol of sex that informs kind of who you are.
And if I'm going to my spouse for my self-identity and needing something from them, including sex for my self-identity, that's going to be a really imbalanced relationship, right? I'm not taking responsibility for myself. I'm expecting my spouse to be responsible, which creates this parent-child dynamic, which again, not very sexy.
Not sexy.
Not sexy at all. And so you're absolutely killing any chance for a thriving, passionate sex life if you're coming in to it from your emotional pain and not as a way to fuel connection and desire relationally.
Well, we know from like pop culture, like this going back to the 80s, right? Like we got sexual healing, right? Like you're looking for your partner to provide this sense of healing that's going to come through this passionate sexual experience. And that's not real. Nope. That's just a pop song. Right?
Yeah. Too like MTV.
Yeah. Well, Matthew, as you were talking, I was thinking, like you said something about not wanting it, but I imagine most guys that are struggling with this are going to go like, how can I not want it? Right? I'm designed to want it. How can I want it less? But I think what you're touching on in that looking into your identity and your relationship with God, like you can put that desire in its right order.
Exactly.
And then it doesn't have to be the thing that runs your life anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's normal. And I mean, it's good, healthy to say, like, we all desire and thrive with connection. And so when someone says like, I'm wanting, right, more sex in our relationship, it's like, sounds like you're wanting more connection. And all of the guys that I work with will say like, oh, absolutely. That's what I want. I want more connection. And so we'll talk about like emotional connection, relational connection, spiritual connection, connection with God, connection with friends, right? Most people who are seeking sex as a form of communication feel alone. They're isolated. And so, and the tragedy is that broken sexuality drives further isolation. So in my history of struggling with sexual addiction and pornography, every time I went to broken sexuality, I just became more and more isolated. I pulled away from people. I shared less with others. And so the very thing I was craving, this connection, I was actually preventing myself from experiencing.
Exactly.
So once I learned to create healthy connection, right? And this kind of very kind of diversified connection, then all of a sudden physical connection, it didn't stop being something that I wanted. I still wanted it. I still have that desire in me, and that's a good. I just know even if that desire isn't met, I'm still going to have a great day, a great week, a great life, right? Because I know that I'm connected kind of in so many different ways.
Mm-hmm. Well, can you guys tell us what are you offering? How can people get connected with you? I know you said you had some coaches here in my area.
Yeah.
So I'm imagining there's different resources all over the place for people. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so our private practice, we have different coaches on staff who they're all couples who have been through this journey themselves. They understand the steps to repair. They are passionate about helping other couples. And so we see individuals, we see couples all across the country. It's all virtual through coaching, which is great because we can reach people anywhere. And so we walk kind of individual couples through this journey. We also have a couples group program. It's a year-long cohort for couples who they've already done some work on the journey. They're usually somewhat through the levels of honesty, safety. They really want to pour into kind of trust and get to that place of intimacy. And we have just found that a group community of other couples who are passionate about the same kind of relationship they are is so encouraging because this work is hard, right? Like it takes a lot out of you. And so to have other people pouring into you and your relationship on that journey is so healing. And it's really about more equipping couples with the ability to care for their relationship long term. That's what that year is about. Really kind of giving them, kind of both moving them into that intimacy place, but giving them the tools to sustain that intimacy over the life of the relationship.
It's really fun. We're always there for the first night when a group launches, and it's amazing how many couples who've been in recovery sometimes for over 10 years will say this is the first time we've ever sat in a group of other couples and talked about our story.
Yeah.
We've named, they'll say like I have people in my individual recovery, right? I might have guys that know me and the wives may have a wives support group. They're like, but I've never known other couples to know us and know our story. And it is amazing just how kind of instantly they get bonded because they share these like common languages and terms and experiences. And then they get to encourage each other. And our favorite part of the program is that many couples who graduate, they end up coming back and leading groups for us. They're like, hey, how do we help other couples? Right? This was fun. I want to keep working on myself. I want to help other couples work on them. And so that's what we've really loved is that what we got to experience in our life, we've been able to share and work with other couples to get that, who are then kind of continuing to pass it on. And that's just so much fun to see all that new life. And that's what we talk about. Intimacy is it generates life. When you are in an intimate relationship and experience, life is generated. That's really the idea of the Trinity, right? That the love of the Father, Son, and Spirit creates life. And so that's what we see in healthy marriages, right? It creates life, it nurtures life, and it's really fun to be a part of that.
Yeah. Okay, so people can get connected with a coach and to start working through those lower levels of the pyramid, and then they can be involved in groups or is that the pathway?
We gotta help. Basically, if you're in the journey, you give us a call. Or go to raabsmithteam.com. We're the only Raabsmiths in the whole world. So we're very easy to find. Yeah. And we love to just connect. And sometimes we just give people resources, even if they don't work with us. We love to point them in the right direction and help them along the way.
Okay, so I'm going to have that link for them in the show notes for the Raabsmith team. That's great resource, you guys. I feel like you guys get it. And so I'm really thankful for you having this conversation with me today. Because you've seen it, I've seen it. There's so many marriages, even within our churches, that are just really struggling or reeling from this kind of thing. So before I let you go, let me ask you, each of you, what are you doing for soul care?
So for me, it's always comes back to being in, well, I'll say two things. Can I pick two things?
Yeah, you can.
Being in nature, there's something about that is uniquely calming and I think just creates a sense of peace and connection to our creator, just like almost instantly. Maybe it's because of like how fast I can get to that place in nature versus other ways that I really love it. And I can just tell I've like throughout my life, I've always craved that. And so always creating space to get outside is a little more challenging now that we're in Memphis and not Southern California. The weather makes it a bit harder to do that. And then the other thing is just new, we call it embodied experiences. When we can like get out and do something new and do something with our bodies that lets us be fully present in that moment, is just really life-giving.
Yeah.
For me, soul care is purposeless play or purposeless activities. It's been really hard sometimes to turn off my brain and to turn off kind of the motor of production. I need to get something done. And when it's not work, it's laundry or it's helping a kid. And I find my soul cared for most when I don't have a purpose. I don't have a task. There's no outcome. I just get to be. And so those are the moments where I feel so revived. And so it's creating those spaces to do nothing, and then finding whatever that's something that we do to be really enjoyable.
Great. Well, I appreciate your perspective on that. You guys are great. And I really love, I feel like we could be friends and colleagues if we weren't across the country. We'll be virtual colleagues. So I really appreciate you guys. I'll have the links for everybody so that I'm sure someone listening or someone they know needs exactly what you guys are offering. So let's make sure we get them connected and just appreciate you.
Great. Thank you so much. Appreciate you.
The Soul Grit podcast is a production of Soul Grit Resources. You can find more at soulgritresources.com or on the socials at Soul Grit Resources. You can email me at info@soulgritresources.com.